All right, today we're going to dive into one of the most wild and turbulent times in modern history, the first half of the 20th century. We'll be looking at it through the eyes of A.C. Ward and his analysis of how a world of absolute certainty just completely fell apart, and what exactly rose up from the ashes. Okay, let's get into it.
Right from the get-go, Ward hits us with the central paradox of the whole era. On one hand, you've got humanity making these unbelievable leaps in science and technology. But on the other hand, all that progress seems to have come with a huge price tag, this deep, unsettling loss of our moral and spiritual compass. And that tension, right there, is what drives this entire story. So to really get why everything collapsed, we have to understand what it was like before. Ward paints this picture of the Victorian world not as something fragile, but as a fortress. A world they believed was built on solid, unshakable rock.
And you can just see the massive shift in thinking right here. The Victorian spirit, was all about acceptance, authority, and this deep belief that things were permanent. The 20th century spirit, totally the opposite. It was driven by this constant nagging need to question everything, to examine everything, and this really unsettling feeling that nothing was fixed.
And listen, this wasn't just some casual idea they had. This was a core, bone-deep conviction. The Victorians genuinely believed that their way of doing things, the family, the British Empire, the Christian Church, was the final, perfected version of civilization. They didn't think they were just living in another chapter of history. They thought they were living in the last chapter. So, what happens when a foundation that's supposed to be unshakable starts to tremble? Well, you get a great upheaval. Let's take a look at the massive forces that, according to Ward, brought that whole house crashing down.
It was like a 1-2-3 punch. First, science gave us these incredible new tools. But those tools, like the combustion engine, could power both the family car and the bomber plane. Then, the absolute pointless carnage of World War I just obliterated a generation's faith in the old leaders who marched them into it. And finally, World War II and the atomic bomb brought a kind of terror the Victorians couldn't have even dreamed of, the idea that we could wipe ourselves out completely.
And out of all this chaos, a new way of thinking was born. Thinkers like George Bernard Shaw became its biggest cheerleaders, basically arguing that nothing, not religion, not tradition, not even science, should just be accepted. You had to question it, examine it, and test it for yourself. Authority was no longer something you just respected.
This quote just perfectly captures the exciting, rebellious side of this new philosophy. To characters like this one, Shaw was basically saying society was being ridiculous. Why are we so careful about updating our machines, but we cling to these ancient, rusty old morals? To these thinkers, an old prejudice was just as useless as an old steam engine.
But here's the flip side. For every person who felt freed by all this questioning, there was someone else who felt completely lost. When you question everything, the very ground you're standing on can just vanish. That rock of certainty, your faith, your traditions, your sense of purpose, it just crumbles, and you're left in this terrifying, empty space.
Now, this whole spiritual crisis didn't just stay in the realm of philosophy. Oh no, it rippled out through the entire culture, and hit the world of literature especially hard. With the old rules gone, writers and artists had a full-blown identity crisis.
It all came down to this one crucial question. If art isn't here to serve God, king, and country anymore, then what is it for? And maybe even more importantly, who is it for? This question was about to split the entire literary world right down the middle.
And you ended up with two main camps. On one side, you had the Fabian group, with guys like Shaw and H.G. Wells. They believed in art for life's sake. For them, literature was a tool, something you could use to engage with society and, hopefully, fix it. But on the other side, you had the Bloomsbury group, with people like Virginia Woolf. They championed art for art's sake. They were all about intellectual purity and creating perfect art for a very small, very educated audience. They basically turned their backs on the messy problems of the masses.
Ward actually points to a single year, 1922, as the major turning point. That's when Joyce's Ulysses and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland came out. And with those books, serious literature basically retreated from the public. It became super complex, super academic, and just plain impossible for the average intelligent reader to understand anymore. And Ward had a pretty scathing name for what he saw happening next: cerebral incest. He argued that literary criticism just became this closed loop. You had academics writing for other academics about books written for academics, totally cut off from the real world. The only thing they were producing was more of themselves. Okay, so while the intellectual elites were retreating into their own world, what was happening out there with everybody else? Well, society itself was being completely reshaped, and a whole new kind of citizen was being created.
Ward calls this new citizen mass man. Now, this isn't the individual, the unique little guy. This is the individual as a data point. Just one member of a huge group whose welfare, everything from healthcare to housing, is managed by the giant impersonal machine of the new welfare state.
And Ward argues this set off a crazy, unintended chain reaction. First, yeah, the welfare state provided amazing benefits, lifting millions out of poverty. But by taking away the old struggles, it also took away the old social anchors, like close-knit communities and church. This led to a kind of spiritual emptiness, a sullen discontent. And what rushed in to fill that void? The endless desire to buy stuff, to own and show off. The age of consumerism had officially begun.
And the symptoms of this new society were popping up everywhere. Pride in your work kind of died with the assembly line. Advertising got really good at bypassing our brains and aiming straight for our subconscious fears and desires. You saw this widespread youth revolt and a kind of cult of immaturity take hold, along with a deep-seated contempt for authority and old-fashioned manners. It was a world that felt like it had lost its moorings. Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started, to that central paradox that really defines Ward's entire view of the 20th century.
This chart really says it all, doesn't it? You can see this stark inverse relationship. As our power over the physical world just skyrockets, our sense of inner certainty and moral direction completely tanks. It really seems like one went up at the direct expense of the other.
In the end, the picture Ward paints is, well, it's pretty tragic. He basically sees the first half of the 20th century as this huge, epic bargain. Humanity gained all this incredible power, wealth, and control over nature. But in the process, we lost our sense of purpose, our traditions, and that feeling of just being at home in the world. And all of this leaves us with one last massive question to think about. In gaining so much technological mastery, we seem to have lost our spiritual compass. Looking back at it all, this incredible period of progress and relapse, you just have to ask, was the price of progress too high?